Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the GSI Podcast, where we will explore the pressing issues of climate change and sustainability. Today, we are privileged to have a distinguished guest, Mrs. Eleanor Jones from Environmental Solutions in Jamaica. And Mrs. Jones brings a wealth of experience and expertise in environmental matters, particularly in the Caribbean context, making her insights invaluable in today's discussion. But before we get started, I want to remind you to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook to stay up to date with all the exciting episodes. So, Mrs. Jones, your extensive experience in environmental solutions, especially within the Caribbean, is truly commendable. So we're eager to dive into today's discussion and gain valuable insights from your perspective. So welcome to our podcast.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Archibald. It's my pleasure. And I look forward to just having a good conversation.
Yes. So first, can you share with our listeners your background, your expertise in climate science or the related fields, and tell us what inspired you to become involved in climate change, in climate advocacy or research?
Okay, sure. As my basic training, I started my career, my university career as a geographer. So my major fields of study, first and second degrees in the area of geography. And then I became an academic at the University of the West Indies at Mona, taught in the geology department there for many years. And I was a geomorphologist, which for many persons, it's sort of the bridging discipline between geology and geography. And we focus on land, what shapes the land. So geo, the land, and morph, the shape. So what is it that contributes to landforms and how we see the land today? While teaching there over the years, I was particularly interested in watersheds and drainage basin and extreme flood events and so on. And then in Jamaica, we had a series of climate triggered events, heavy rainfall, flood events. And when we went into the field and did the reconnaissance, looked at the damage, it was clear to me that what we were looking at was the effects, not the effects of the event per se, not how much rainfall we had, but where the rain was falling, where people were living, how they were living, what they were doing, so that it was, when we started to talk about disasters or the impact of these events, it was really more in terms of human activity than of the science itself. And so that led me into seeing that the fact that we needed to think more about environment, which is natural and built. And when we speak of environment, we're talking about the physical, the land, and the drainage, the geology. We're talking about the biological, which would be your ecology, what people are accustomed to in terms of the trees, the flora, the fauna, and very importantly, the social aspect, which is the people aspect, the community. So environment embodies all of this. And in working with environmental management and seeing how all the pieces come together, as time progressed, we began to see changes taking place in atmospheric conditions, and the whole issue of climate change has, entered the global agenda, so to speak, getting increasing attention. Just before all of the attention globally, at UWI, there was a climate studies group that was started, and by Professor Anthony Chen and other colleagues in Trinidad and so on. And they were looking at the impact of climate and changing climate on health, on vectors, and what was happening, particularly to mosquitoes. And they were doing studies of dengue. Well, that of course has grown tremendously and expanded way beyond. We still look at health, but the fact is that climate studies became a central um, plate, if you will, at UE, Mona, physics department. And I worked, closely with them, but more so after I left UE because in doing all of this practical work, I became more and more concerned about application of knowledge and application of the science because we can study for the sake of studying. We can learn. Building knowledge is very important. But when it comes to the human condition, when it comes to what we are now describing as sustainability, where we want to ensure that future generations have the benefit of the resources that we have, then you have to really look at the application of science, application of the knowledge. And so I moved into an environmental management consulting business, which became Environmental Solutions Limited. Initially, we were looking at the vulnerability of the Caribbean region, especially the coastal areas, to disasters, to hazards, natural hazards. And then, of course, we, developed and expanded beyond that into what it meant to have development, which is essential, harmonized with environment so that we can have better living conditions, we can reduce risk, we can reduce loss, and we have the best of both worlds, so to speak. So that's a long answer, Wayne, to your question, because it has been a journey. And now with climate change and with all the scientific knowledge which has been generated globally, and here in the Caribbean, we play a major role because we have been included and doing a lot of things with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, coming out of what some people might remember as the World Conference on Environment and Development, the first one, which was held in Rio. And we had all of these global agreements, one of which was climate change. And so we're learning more and we are seeing the effects. So it's with climate change, we used to talk about, and we still talk about global warming, because what it is that our atmosphere is warming at an unprecedented rate, very high rate, and it is warming not because it never warmed before, but the rate of warming is what is alarming, and the fact that all the research is pointing to the situation where it is human beings or activities that are creating all of these problems, problems which are in turn damaging us and our life support systems as human beings.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. It's been quite a journey, and you just answered all my questions, so I don't have any more questions for you. But as part of that journey, you talked about you start with the climate studies group at UE Mona, and uh, that's how we met, right? Because that was back in 2016 when we were working on the vulnerability climate change assessment for the U.S. Virgin Islands.
That's
You
correct.
know,
Yes,
so that
yes.
has been long ago. And part of the reason why we were connected to the climate studies group is because you have worked extensively throughout a lot of the Caribbean islands, uh, looking at climate change and helping each island to, I guess, mitigate the impacts of the climate change, right?
That's right.
So basically, that's how you have the role that you have been playing in addressing it in the Caribbean and promoting sustainability and so forth. So, what are some of the other places you talked about? What's going on in Jamaica now? We mentioned the work that you did in the Virgin Islands. What are some of the other places where you have worked
Oh,
and
worked
have
in
helped to?
all the English speaking Caribbean islands, and I've worked in Haiti, and as we say islands, of course, we talk small island developing states, which some of them are mainland like Guyana, and Belize, Suriname, but because of their extensive coastal settlements, we still refer to them as island developing states. So we've
Right,
worked
right,
in all of them: Suriname, Guyana, Belize on the Central American coast, Trinidad and Tobago, Grenada, Dominica, coming all the way up all of the islands, and the Dominican Republic, Haiti, the Bahamas. So all across um, the Caribbean seas. And then beyond that, one of the very interesting things that we did, not related to climate per se, but related to natural hazards, working in the Maldives following the tsunami that occurred after that major earthquake. Some people might remember that uh, tsunami. And the Maldives, as you know, is very dependent on tourism, as indeed the Caribbean region. But I was asked, contracted by the United Nations, to go to the Maldives to develop a strategic plan for the tourism sector because they were it was a major disaster for them in terms of being unprepared and creating a lot of confusion. And so the tour operators and so on decided that until the Maldives got a framework for plan of action for handling disasters, they were not going to be sending any more visitors. So I'm basically saying that our work is not just climate resilience, but we're looking at natural hazard risk, and what climate change is doing now and global warming is doing is exacerbating or augmenting the impacts of the climate triggered events, which would be our storms and hurricanes and so on, which we all know about. But the natural hazard risk is what we also have to tie in if we're
right,
talking about sustainability.
right. So I didn't know you went to the Maldives. I didn't know you worked over there. I should have known you those
Yes,
times, you know. But
yes.
but we're
Very
talking about,
interesting place. Huh?
yes, yes, we're talking about the dire effects of global warming, climate change, right? And as you pointed out, they're being felt all across the world, and they threaten to worsen in decades, right? Now, for our audience, I just wanted to say that the primary cause of global warming, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is the massive amount of greenhouse gases, especially like carbon dioxide and so on, being released into the Earth's atmosphere by human activities,
Correct.
right? Like
That's
fossil
correct.
fuels and so forth. At COP recently, COP 28, there was some discussion, a little controversy about phasing out of fossil fuels, and that really stirred up a lot of conversation. And you also mentioned about the IPCC, and they said in an article that I read some time ago that we are likely to see more Category 4 and 5 hurricanes and tropical storms as ocean temperature rise, right?
Yeah.
So if that's the case, explain to us, to the audience, right? How is it that these higher global temperatures are impacting the weather and climate patterns that we see worldwide and that we feel like so significantly in the Caribbean, a small island?
Okay. The global circulation pattern. We have something that we call, let's say, the energy budget, right? Where the ocean currents and winds are stimulated by the differences in temperature between our tropical regions, subtropics, and northern regions. Temperatures, of course, are highest in the tropical regions and lowest in the um, northern climates, going towards the Arctic. That I think people would understand. So, if you have this variation in temperature, and you have the warm temperatures being carried north and the colder temperatures being brought south, and you have what we call like a conveyor belt, if you can imagine that. So, as these patterns change now, the global warming, that is taking place is changing the atmospheric temperatures in the higher elevations of the atmosphere, if you will. Why global warming is causing all these increases in and unpredictability more than anything else. Unpredictability. We don't know when or how strong the storms are going to be, because what we have noticed, especially in the Caribbean, is that you will hear about a tropical depression because the warmer temperatures lead to, sort of low pressure systems. Then you'll hear it that it exists, and before you know it, it has developed from a depression right up into maybe a category 1, and within a day or two, sometimes category 3, category 4, we have had those. And so that is what the global warming is
Mm-hmm.
doing. It's changing the circulation pattern in the atmosphere, and it is making our systems more unpredictable. It is making them more intense. And so we have those are storms and hurricanes and so on. But then we also have flood rains, extreme events that give you flood rains. And one of the things, again, with climate change is that we have what we call short duration, high intensity rain. So you have a rainfall that comes short period of time, maybe over a day or whatever, very intense, dumping a lot of water, and the infrastructure or drainage systems or gullies or canals are not designed to carry off that amount of water, and therefore we get flooding in a lot of places where it's unexpected. So you have the extreme rainfall events with the floods. And then the other side to that is that we also have drought, protracted periods of dryness. And again, some of these dry periods lasting longer than we are accustomed to, and sometimes occurring when we don't expect it, in the same way you're getting rain when you don't expect it. So, if there's one thing that we need to think about with the climate triggered events, is that they are unpredictable, and we need to pay a lot of attention to how we can cope. So when we talk about building climate resilience, we can't do very much to change all of the Caribbean, since we're talking Caribbean in particular. The world at large, they're trying to reduce the amount of greenhouse gases. That's very important, so that we can reduce the rate of warming. But for us in the Caribbean, while we have to look at um, moving out from fossil fuels, maybe trying to do more renewable energy, we have to pay a lot of attention to what we call adaptation to meet the unpredictable.
I was going to ask you about like some of the measures, like for regular people out there, right?
Mhm.
People who are not climate scientists, people who are not in tune with what's going on in this space. Like, what are some of the things that they can do to mitigate some of the effects of climate change on these extreme weather events that you talked about?
Okay. First, the first thing I want to say is that people, when you're listening to the news and so on, we have to, when we're talking about climate and we're talking about the climate space, we have to make a difference between mitigation and adaptation. When we're talking mitigation and climate, we're talking about reducing greenhouse gases. So, what can you do if you want to contribute to reducing greenhouse gas? You can make sure that, for instance, the cars that you drive are properly serviced, so that you're not putting out a lot of soot and causing damaging air quality, because all of that contributes. And you also want to pay attention to changing from fossil fuel to renewable energy, which is happening a lot within the Caribbean. So people are going solar, you're going wind, and you may not be able to do that at the household level, or you may be able to. There are some people who are doing that at the business level. So you try to see how you can adopt some of the renewable energy measures. Then water availability is another critical thing, because of course if we're not getting the rain that we expected, or we don't have it distributed. We want to be able to harvest rain when we do have it and store it. Harvesting is one, but the storage of water is very important so that we can use it for irrigation of our crops during prolonged dry periods, and we can also use it for our homes when we're not getting the water supply that we can. So we need to pay attention to um, harnessing water. We need to pay attention um, to making sure that we try to fit into using renewable energy. Now, a third aspect which I think is very important for individuals to pay attention to is health. There is a strong link between climate change or changing climate, global warming, and our health. Many persons will remember, we know about dengue, we hear about dengue and the mosquitoes. And
And
dengue,
malaria and stuff like that.
sorry,
No, I was saying, yeah, dengue, malaria.
right.
Uh,
But more, yeah, that's true. And you will remember that we had a few years ago an outbreak of chikungunya, which was like a new disease, again vector borne, but from the mosquitoes. Now, one of the things about climate change is that the breeding pattern of these mosquitoes is changing, so that you're getting mosquitoes in areas where you never had them before, like they're moving further away from the tropical belt. So that's one thing. And then they're coming fast and furious, and they are causing some of these diseases. And chikungunya was very debilitating for many countries in the Caribbean, and it threw people out. Some people even got issues with their bones and things, and difficult. And then, of course, it affected productivity because they weren't able to go to work and so on. So we have to think of that. And also with the warming, we have to think of our respiratory tract, because again, if you have too much dust, too high temperatures, it's very hard on your breathing systems. So you try to keep dust at bay, and you try to ensure that you keep your mosquitoes away from your surroundings by making sure that you follow, all the patterns, don't have standing water and that kind of thing. So paying attention to climate change and health is extremely important. We also have another aspect that you can do. You know how we discharge our waste, and because we are coastal states, a lot of things end up in the coastal zone. Now, with the warming of the sea temperatures, our coral reefs are being destroyed because they're bleaching, and they're not no longer able to afford us the protection of our coastline against storm waves. And storm waves are associated, of course, with hurricanes. And then global warming is also causing levels of the sea to rise. So you're getting rising sea level, you're getting more storm waves, and we're destroying the corals. Well, not we, but the global warming is compromising the corals. Now, when we discharge waste into our coastal waters, we are making it worse for the corals to survive. So the way we manage our waste, the way we discharge our effluent, whether we're talking about sewage or we're talking about gray water, wash water, whatever it is, we try to protect the coastal waters so that the corals, which are under stress from higher temperatures, are not worsened by our own activity.
okay, I want to just go back a little bit. You made quite a number of very important points just now, but I want to go back to the public health aspect of it, right? Now, it's noted that the change in climate and the rise in temperatures tend to expand the ranges of disease carrying mosquitoes and ticks, and it gives rise to malaria, dengue fever, Even the Zika
chikungunya,
virus, I
Zika,
remember,
Zika.
yes,
That's
I
correct.
remember the Zika a couple of years ago. Yes.
Right.
So, like, I want to speak to the policies, right? What role do you think that public health interventions and policies can play in helping to mitigate the health risks that are associated with climate change?
Well, we need to really ramp up perhaps our public information, communication, sensitize people to how you reduce breeding areas for the mosquitoes. That's, I think, important. And so you also need to try and train your public health inspectors, and have a policy where maybe they inspect. They used to, many years ago, you had regular public health inspectors when there used to be diseases, perhaps when many of us were just children, or even before some of us were born. But we need to pay attention to the fact that health is extremely important. And if you want your people quality of life and so on, it's not about how much money you make, but really how well you can keep your healthy, you can keep your population. And if we recognize that um, changing climate, warming temperatures, drying conditions, you're not going to have water to do all the sanitation that you need. You have to put policies in place to have to protect your watersheds, so that you minimize runoff, and you try to have sustainable water supply when we do get it, and when we have the heavy rains, that we're not just washing away our soil. So the protection, as it relates to water, is important, because water is also health. And then what you do with sanitation is important, because if you don't have good management of your sanitary systems, then you also are leaving your population at risk to deteriorating health conditions.
Right. So everything that we have touched on so far, the biodiversity, the ecosystems, the extreme weather patterns, and so on, all of that comes with some economic cost, right? Uh, Especially in the Caribbean, where we feel the impacts of climate change much more than in some of the larger countries. So, if what are some of the projected economic costs you think of climate change? And I want to go back even to talking about all the funds that were committed to to smaller countries. What's the word that they use? What's the loss and damage fund
Yeah, well, the loss and damage
for?
fund was just passed at COP.
Right,
They were struggling with that for a long time, and that was one of the first things they did at COP, which was considered a breakthrough,
right,
where the more developed countries are going to be putting into a fund, so that countries can have some reference. Now, how it will be administered and so on is another thing. But
do we
they
actually see any of those funds?
no, we haven't seen them yet. First of all, COP was
I'm,
just no, and
I mean, like in previous COPs, because this is not the first time that they've promised.
no,
Uh,
they didn't pass it. They only just now passed it.
okay,
It wasn't passed before, and there's been a lot of discussion about how much money should come to the countries, and from the more developed that have caused all of this climate change should be given. But my personal view is this: we cannot sit back as small island developing states or vulnerable communities and wait for some of this funding for us to do things. We need to take charge of our own vulnerability. We are vulnerable. We are going to feel the effects. So we have to say, now, what should we be doing for ourselves to minimize loss, to minimize damage, and to ensure that when we have issues, we have recovery policies in place that can help us to bounce back and get up, and as the saying goes, build back better, right? After the pandemic, this was the phrase build back better, so that you don't rebuild your weakness, so that you leave yourself exposed to the same level of loss, but you build back. We have a responsibility to take charge of ourselves and not wait and make a fuss because they haven't done it, because we will be waiting forever and we will be losing forever.
When you say we, are you referring to us, the citizens, residents, or are you talking about the government specifically?
Both. Because citizens, you can know what you can do to protect your health. You make sure that you ensure you have your sanitation, you ensure you don't breed mosquitoes, you don't breed rats, you don't do that. You also look at where you are going to live. Because when you're living in vulnerable areas, you're going to lose. And then now the government side, the government needs to ensure that there is effective planning, and they have a responsibility to help their citizens as well. But it's not for citizens to wait for government only. We need to do it. Government needs to set the framework, the policies, and then citizens need to follow and to see how they can also help themselves. Where you build, how you build, all of these things are important.
What are some of the policies you think, right? I know we touched on several other things earlier, but what are some of the policies
Well,
or the
housing,
initiatives?
living,
Right.
settlements. Your policy must be to do your due diligence, environmental due diligence, so that you try to identify what risks there might be and how you reduce the risk and the exposure. There are some things that you can't change, so therefore you stay away from areas, or those where you can make a difference, you try to make that difference. But it must be, you must take it into account, and that's where the policy, that's where the government comes in, where you have appropriate planning.
Okay. So at COP, I'm going back to COP. This was my first COP actually, so I was very excited to be there, you know. And
And it was the
I had,
largest ever,
yes,
and with multiple dimensions. And
right.
water was a critical thing, and the whole business of the fossil fuels. Yes.
Yeah, and I mentioned about the discussion they had around transitioning from fossil fuels to renewable, clean, renewable energy. Uh, in your opinion, right? Well, I had the opportunity to moderate a panel on small island developing states about the just transition to renewable energy. And so we had folks there from Taiwan, uh, from Palau, and from St. Kitts and Nevis, discussing what each country is doing to help to transition away from fossil fuels. What do you think, from your perspective, the importance of rapidly transitioning from fossil fuels to clean energy, uh, like solar, wind, or geothermal? How quickly do you think that can be done, or do you think it's something that can be done rather quickly?
I
And
don't
maybe
think it
what
can be done
impacts?
quickly. It can't be done quickly. There are some, varying stages, but it can't be done quickly because, first of all, we have been entrenched with fossil fuels, our distribution systems, our generating systems. So we have to look at how we do effective balance. And some places may be able to move, especially very small places, may be able to move more quickly than others. But I don't think it's a rapid, quick fix. I think there's a commitment, a general commitment, and certainly a talking commitment to shift from fossil fuels. And I think we just have to try and press that and look at the alternatives. But then the question about whether the fossil fuel replacement can give you all that you need to run your factories and so on. A little bit more research and technological applications will be needed there. So it's many moving parts that I think have to be factored in.
Right. You and I both are members of the private sector organization of Jamaica, right? And you're
Yes.
the chair of the Energy and Environment Committee. One of the things that, at least since I've joined, that they've been doing is having this tree planting initiative, right? So for the kids out there, I would like you to uh, explain to us or to them how the tree planting improving soil health, better forest management, enhance natural carbon sinks.
Well, the trees are considered the lungs of the atmosphere, and they are the lungs because they do the breathing in and breathing out. You know, taking in the CO2 and producing your oxygen. So you have gaseous exchange, but trees absorb carbon dioxide, so they are regarded as important for sequestration. And it's vegetation, trees, but they also include mangroves, believe it or not, and coral reefs. Mangroves, seagrass beds, coral reefs are also important carbon sequestration mechanisms. Now, one of the things that I have been reading about, and I think it's something that we have to really seriously think about, because the levels of emissions have been rising, although we're talking about trying to keep temperatures down and trying to stem release of greenhouse gases. I think we're going to have to pay a lot more attention to how we can take this carbon out of the atmosphere, because it's not going to happen by having reduced emissions only, but the whole business of how you remove the carbon, and I think some new research and so on is going to have to go in for that purpose.
Okay. What are some of the other, let's talk about Jamaica, right? What are some of the things that are actually going on right now in Jamaica from a policy perspective, a research, private sector perspective to kind of help the island to be more resilient and to help to adapt and mitigate some of the impacts of climate change?
Well, one of the big things for Jamaica is that the government policy is pushing towards having up to 30% was, and then now they're talking about up to 50% of renewables generating the energy. And that's a big deal. So you have requests for proposals coming in for solar and so on to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So that's a big thing for Jamaica. There's also adaptation strategies where they're looking at the talk. We have a national adaptation plan where they're putting in coastal infrastructure to help to protect the coastline against rising sea level and against storm waves. So those things are happening. The two major airports, which are in Kingston, one in Montego Bay, which are pretty close to sea level, they have engaged in elevating the runways. And in the case of Montego Bay, last week there was a major storm wave event, and the runway in Montego Bay had been elevated, and so it was not damaged. Thank goodness, it's almost like it was finished just in time because it was not damaged by these waves, which again unpredictable. These are nothers come off the North American mainland, did a lot of damage in Cayman, and did a lot of damage along the north coast of Jamaica as well. So some of that, and raising the road, low lying roads like major lifeline roads. Those are some of the things.
Okay. In spite of all these things that we see happening in the Caribbean, in Jamaica, all around the world, right? There are some people who still say that climate change isn't real.
Well,
That is a
you
hoax.
will have that. You will have that. And if it doesn't touch you directly, that's why you have to continue with the communication. You have to continue with the message because there are still people who feel climate change is way out. 50 years' time, I won't be alive. And that's not true. Climate change is right now, it's happening right now. And when you see one of the things, for instance, even with these storm waves that so badly affected Cayman and Jamaica, with the coral reefs dying off, one of the points that has been made that it will have to be researched further is that coral reefs usually help to protect your coastline, and your coral reefs are weak because of the higher temperatures that is causing them to die off. So you didn't have that additional protection. So the storm waves are coming with unpredictable strength out of from the air masses out of the U.S., and then your coastal protection itself is reduced. So you have to really say it if it's not affecting me directly, and then most people are affected by floods, by droughts, by hurricanes, by storms. So if you're seeing it happening, they probably don't not still not connecting the dots or making it. So we have to keep communicating and keep educating.
Right, definitely. And one of the things that we didn't mention is also the wildfires that we're seeing over on the west coast of the United States, in
Yes, and
California and those
not only the
places.
well, United States is close to us in the Caribbean, but you have wildfires Australia. You have them in a lot of other places, and that is also related to climate change.
Right, right, right. So even as like we see emissions being reduced, right? I think it's still important that communities increase their resilience to these impacts that are already unfolding. Like
That's correct.
constructing seawalls, elevating buildings can help to protect against like the sea level rise and stronger storms. By the way, do you think that we'll ever see a Category 6 hurricane?
We might because now they're talking about Category 5, and so why not 6? Well, we have
I
Category 5
mean,
already, so they're
yeah,
talking
we do.
about 6. Yeah, yeah, because
Yeah,
some of these wind speeds are phenomenal.
right. So, I mean, I've experienced two Category 5 hurricane in St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands, like back
Yes,
in 2017,
right,
so
right.
I know what it can do. And I can't imagine if we were to get a Category 6, like what will actually happen.
Yeah, just
It's
wipe
kind of
you off.
scary
That's
to
it.
think about it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of people, when I told folks that we're going to be talking about climate change, in this episode, some people were like asking, well, what are some of the actual stuff that we actually talked about in this
Yeah, we
episode, what
talked
we
about a
can
lot
do?
of actual stuff.
Yeah, yes, the seawalls, maybe elevating buildings, improving the drainage systems, green infrastructure that can better manage heavy rainfall, even updating building codes, I
That's
think
correct.
is very
That's correct.
important in small islands. The utility grade transportation networks to withstand severe heat and so on.
Yeah,
And, all these other aspects of it that people don't really pay attention to, right?
yes, yes,
But the most vulnerable population actually has to deal with a lot of things without anyone really coming to their assistance. So what do you think that the government? I just wanted to speak specifically to the vulnerable population. Who do
yes.
you
But you see,
consider the
one of
vulnerable?
the things we don't want to promote, Wayne, because people already wait for the government to do things. And government needs to set framework, government needs to put the infrastructure, government needs to have policy, but people, individuals, citizens also need to do certain things. One of the things we have not mentioned is agriculture, because agriculture is one of those areas, and I mean, food security is important. We have to look at what we plant and how we plant, and our farmers are very resilient in most instances. So we need the research. That is where we can have probably government supported and university supported research for drought tolerant plants, so that we're planting with drought tolerant species, so that we're doing, and also how we deal with drip irrigation, so we use water more efficiently. All of those things are, and maybe incentives where you reduce taxes on drip irrigation and also on solar pumps for your agriculture. And so agriculture needs quite a bit of attention too.
Right. So it has been quite a fascinating discussion so far. So to tell us, what are some of the things that you're working
I
on
thought you
right
were
now?
finished with me already, Wayne.
No, no, not yet. What are some of the things that you're doing? What are some of the interesting projects you have going on with ESL?
Well, we have worked with the airport. We're working with the infrastructure um, projects, trying to make them resilient, and working on adaptation plans. We're working on recovery frameworks also for for the Caribbean generally. Worked on recovery framework for the tourism sector globally, and then also, as I said, recovery frameworks and disaster risk reduction, getting resilience into it, and paying attention to climate change, but recognizing that what climate change is doing is making some of our vulnerabilities worse. Because remember, we have earthquakes, we have volcanic eruptions. All of that is a part of the Caribbean space. Caribbean lives with risk. And so if we're saying, and we are so exposed to the effects of climate, that we really have to pay attention to managing our risk, which means we have to be aware of our risk. And that's where the government comes in by supporting information, spreading information at the different levels of government, especially local government, communities, and trying to make things happen.
Okay. So just to wrap up this conversation, that I actually learned a few things here. I even wrote down a couple words that you mentioned. Geomorphologist. I never heard that word before, so
Really?
I'm gonna
Okay.
learn
Okay.
that.
So you can go and look it
You
up
know,
now and see.
but yes, yes, yes.
The shape,
But
geo is the shape of the earth. The morphology is shape, right?
right.
Characteristics, and then the geo is the earth. So you're looking at the shape of the earth. What are the factors that give rise to the shape of the earth? So your geologists pay a lot of attention to what's going on below the crust. We look at what's happening as a result of what's going on below the crust. What is the manifestation on the surface?
Definitely. So, just to kind of summarize some of the things for our audience, we can see that uh, the effects of climate change and global warming, those are two different things, right? It clearly presents an existential threat with the potential to drastically damage economies, ecosystems, infrastructure, and public health worldwide.
Right.
But I think with immediate and cooperative action to mitigate these emissions and enhance resilience, adaptation, as you mentioned, uh, the worst climate change impacts can still be avoided or reduced. So there is still time. I'm going to ask you, how much time do you think we have?
I
But there
can't.
is still some
That
time.
I could not answer. But I think we need to move now, because climate change is now. One of the things we
Right.
haven't even spoken about is the tourism sector, which is so dependent on, for
Yes,
most islands, the coastal area, and that sector is particularly vulnerable if you look at
yes.
all the aspects of climate change and risk.
And most of our economies in the islands are
Right.
heavily dependent on tourism.
Tourism, quite so.
So that's also something
Right.
that we have to look at,
Right.
you know.
Tourism and
But
agriculture, two key areas.
yeah,
Yeah.
so although we don't know how much time we have, there's still enough time to safeguard our future, and but we believe that the window is closing very fast.
That's right.
And uh, thank you very much for coming on with me this week. It has been quite an enlightening discussion. I hope people will find it informative. You've shared quite a lot of valuable information with us. And it has been quite even a learning experience for me. So thank you very much. And I'll give you the last word.
Well, my last word would be thank you very much for hosting this conversation, Wayne, because I think the more conversations we have is the more enlightened our people will be. And if you are enlightened, if you understand the issues and understand how the issues affect you, because that's human nature. What's in it for me? Why should I bother? And what about my children? Because children are at risk for some of these things. And so I think the more we spread the word and we get it down to the level of why should I care? I should care because it is going to affect my health. It's going to affect my food supply, my water supply. It's going to affect how I live, how I get to work, all of these things. So it is about what's in it for me, and I would say everything is in it for you as an individual, for us as individuals to pay attention to the impact of global warming, what it is doing to us, and why we should make every effort to not only reduce greenhouse gases but also put in place coping strategies or adaptation strategies to minimize our own personal loss and dislocation.
All right. So, Mrs. Jones, thank you very much. A special very thanks for sharing your expertise with us. And we would like to remind the audience to don't forget to subscribe to the GSI podcast so you'll never miss an episode. And stay tuned for our upcoming episodes where we'll explore even more fascinating topics. If you have questions, suggestions, or you want to connect with us, you can reach out to us via our social media platform. Remember that your feedback is invaluable, so please leave us a review for your favorite podcast platform. So thank you for being part of our podcast community, and until next time, take care and stay curious.